Right guys, so today I'm going to be talking about the revival of the 4-4-2, and the reason why I want to talk about that is that we've witnessed a transition in English football certainly where teams opted for a 4-3-3 press and the 4-4-2 seemed to have died down a bit. We only saw teams with a low block play it like Burnley who were willing to concede possession in their own half, especially under Sean Dyche, but a lot of the teams opted for a 4-3-3 press. But nowadays, we're seeing teams go back to the 4-4-2. And I'm going to be explaining why teams are going back to their 4-4-2 system and why teams are willing to, use 4-4-2 no longer in a low block, but they're using it in a mid to high block and how they've tweaked the 4-4-2. But first, I'm going to explain why the 4-4-2 has came back by explaining the problem with the 4-3-3 that a lot of teams experienced. So normally when teams press with a 4-3-3, essentially what would happen is you had their main striker press their two centre backs, and then you had the two wingers joining in with the striker, and they would press between the spaces between the centre halves and their fullback. Now, the problem that occurred with this was at first it was very effective, but then as teams evolved, there were many ways to deal with this. So one way to deal with it and how Pep Guardiola dealt with the 4-3-3 press was he would simply just put one fullback into midfield, and then they'll build up with a with a back three. And what that meant was essentially it gave the team a superiority or a number advantage in midfield. As you can see here, there are four midfielders to the other team's three midfielders. So in the middle of the park, you had a 4 against 3. And essentially what that meant was in the build-up phase, essentially what this led to was the fact that when one centre half had the ball, they would then decide where to pass the ball according to where they had the superiority. So essentially, what would happen is number five would drop deep, number 4 would drop deep into these two spaces, and essentially one of the two midfielders would tend to follow. That would leave a free man, this number 8 free. So essentially, the ball would go over to this side, and then essentially the presser, the number 11 who's trying to press that space, would initially try to cut off this space here. But then what would that lead to is that this ball can then be passed into number 4, and then number 4 can give it straight to number 3 because they've created a numerical advantage on the right side, on my screen, on the right side of the field. As you can see, 3, 4, 8, and there's only 11 and 7. So they've created this they've created this 3v2 here. Another way that teams beat the press was essentially you saw Man United do this against Manchester City under Solskjaer quite a lot, was either these two would drop and then they would also put this player also in midfield, and then but just a tiny bit up, almost linking up with the forward. So you had 4 there and you had 2 players pressing, and then this would give this option for the long ball to be played into this number 7 over here. And essentially, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got a lot of victories using this tactic against Pep Guardiola, and even Jurgen Klopp used this tactic against Pep Guardiola. So essentially, to stop this from happening, what teams now do is you see teams like Arsenal did it against Manchester United, is they press. So if we go back to our standard 4-4-2 here, as you can see, what teams now do is with their striker and a winger, they would have someone from midfield pressing. So we saw someone like Odegaard taking responsibility and pressing, and then you have someone like Saka pressing as well. Now what this does is, as I mentioned in my last video, it stops teams from it helps team cut out the passing lane, as you can see here. So teams struggle to this is essentially what the point of it is to cut out the passing lanes. But then it's also very hard to break this press unless you've got a ball playing goalkeeper, or you've got a press resistant CDM that's willing to take the ball under pressure, or a ball carrying midfielder that's willing to take the ball under pressure. So with this, so now what you see a lot of teams trying to do is you have them to beat this full press. What you have them doing is you either have, again, the same principle applies. They'll push their wing backs up, and teams won't mind that. Although there's like a numerical disadvantage, and these two would go up. It now requires the keeper to come out and be good with his feet. So this is why you see Onana, Edison, and Alisson being used a lot more in the first phase of the build-up, because it's now up for the keeper to relieve pressure, and it's up for the keeper to go long to find these players. A game that really showed this last year was, if you look at Man City beating Arsenal 4-1, Arsenal would press, and City under Edison would just go long to Haaland and then use that numerical advantage in midfield they created to start their attacks. Another way that teams have been beating this is also they've dropped, what teams have been doing, it hasn't been as effective, is they've been dropping someone else. So like you saw Man United do it, they drop someone like Casemiro, or you have a number 8 join the first phase of their build-up. The reason why that hasn't been effective is if the opposition team still cut out passing lanes, essentially what you have is you just have your defenders playing the ball back to the keeper, and then again the keeper has to go long. The reason why the 4-4-2 press has been very, very effective is also because, the reason why the 4-4-2 has come back is because when you press with a front four, another thing that's really that's happening is teams aren't pressing now to win the ball in higher up the pitch. They're not pressing to win the ball back. They're pressing because they want the keeper to go long. And essentially what happens is once the keeper goes long, teams are now dropping off their 2 holding midfielders there. So either when 1-8 like Odegaard's gone to join, Declan Rice and probably someone like Havertz would drop behind. And what the plan is now is that even when teams do go long for that long ball, these two would either one would position themselves right in front to win that ball back, or what they do is, even if they do get the ball, you've got 5 players against the opposition's 3. So if the ball goes there, they would follow and try and box the opposition in and win the ball back. So that's the reason why we're seeing a revival of the 4-4-2, is essentially because teams are now making sure that their 2 wingers are joining their 2 strikers in a 4 press.